Hi guys, welcome to the Design Talk Designing for the Future UX and Next Gen Tech Talk. Today we have our speaker Sunjoo Park with us. She's a UI UX designer from ARC, which is a biotech company. And with that, we'll let you take it away, Sunjoo.
Cool. Hi, thank you to the Catalyst team for the intro and for inviting me here today. I'm Sunjoo, and today I'll be talking about UX from the next gen tech perspective and how we can prepare ourselves as designers in this digital product space for the next generation of emerging technologies. We'll leave the chat open, I think, so feel free to comment any questions or save them at the end, so I'll have time to answer them. Cool. Um, so to do a little introduction myself, I'm currently a UI UX designer at a company called ARC Biotech here in Cambridge, where I've had the wonderful opportunity to build a model-powered simulation software for bioprocess from concept to launch as a founding designer. My work experience is mostly focused on leveraging emerging technologies like AI, machine learning, and XR. And I also have a background in industrial design and computation. Okay, before jumping right in, here's the agenda for today. First, I'll be touching on where next-gen technologies are today, then dive into next-gen design principles. And in the second half, I'll sort of go through how we can apply these next-gen design principles in more specific categories like AI and machine learning, and then extended realities. Okay, cool. So let's take a moment to zoom out and ask, where exactly are we right now in 2025 with next gen tech? What kind of emerging technologies are there? If it's possible, I want to do a short little exercise here. Is the chat live right now? If so, could you comment any emerging technologies that you've seen or at least heard of over the past year? Let me see if I can access the chat. AI, of course. Okay, maybe just AI then. But in case you're not familiar with next-gen technologies, I'll give a brief introduction to the three main technologies that have really been trending over the past few years and that I'll be talking about in this presentation. First, oh, we got virtual reality. Okay, that's within XR. So we'll be talking about that today as well. So the first is, oh, we got another one. Maybe it's a little delayed. We got blockchain. Yeah, of course, blockchain's also been on the topic the last couple years. Awesome. Anyone else? Okay, feel free to keep sending those in. So I'll go over AI first. I'm sure you've heard about AI a million times now, but it stands for artificial intelligence, referring to computer systems that can imitate human intelligence. So essentially being able to do things like speech recognition, decision making, and pattern identification. Some popular use cases are, of course, OpenAI's ChatGPT, and Claude, which is really starting to gain popularity. And next is machine learning. ML, which stands for machine learning, is a branch of AI that imitates the way humans learn and enhances its performance with data intake. So some examples are, I'm pretty sure you're also familiar with this, how social media For You pages or watch recommendations are populated. It's going to filter content based on what you previously watched, liked, or interacted with. And last but not least, we have XR, which stands for extended realities. This is a catch-all term for virtual reality, VR, mixed reality, MR, and augmented reality, AR. So some examples would be VR experiences are fully immersed in a virtual world. So you might have a headset where you only see the virtual world and AR filters that sort of overlays virtual objects in your physical space. And mixed reality is sort of somewhere in between, where virtual objects are tied to specific objects in your physical world. Cool. And now next gen design principles. So even getting like a basic overview of these technologies really shows that emerging technologies go beyond our traditional web app experiences into different dimensions even. So for next gen tech, it's natural that we need next gen ways of thinking about UI UX design. And for the most part, the basics of UI UX design apply to emerging technologies as well. You know, as designers, always we want to be creating experiences that are useful, accessible, and engaging. And we'll follow the same process of empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And we'll use tools like heuristics evaluations and A/B tests to test hypotheses. But these are just the basics. On top of all of these things, because we're dealing with technologies that may be too new to be have standards in this industry or has not even been democratized yet, I believe that there are needs to uh, have an extra layer of understanding and considerations specific to these new technologies for us to really succeed as designers in this field. So I'll go through these next-gen design principles in two parts. The first being about having the right mindset in the space, and the second about how to switch your design considerations based on timing as these technologies evolve rapidly in the space. So the first mindset that you have as a next-gen tech designer, you have to be willing to understand how the technology works. And I'm not saying that we need to study every technical detail from an engineering perspective, but it does definitely help to know on a broader sense, what are the core components of making this technology work? What are current technical limitations? Where is the room for improvement? How is it expected to expand for multiple use cases? So dedicating time to research and actually learn about the technologies themselves not only gives us a clearer picture of how we might utilize them in practical and scalable ways, but also set smart flows and design standards that are relevant to the characteristics of the technology. A great example I brought here is the thumbs up and thumbs down feature you can see in a lot of AI products. This design was made on the understanding that large language models generate responses based on statistical patterns in training data. So they're more likely to hallucinate on topics where data is limited or ambiguous. I'm pretty sure you've all experienced that. So by letting users rate responses as good or bad, it creates a feedback loop so the model could learn from user judgment and fine-tune itself. And this is a great example of how knowing the technology and how it works drives the establishment of best practice design patterns in a relatively newer concept of a product. And to do a little segue off of the point that some emerging technologies may not have established on what is best practice yet, if there's no design convention in place, a good principle that you can design by is familiarity. Some technologies introduce concepts that are so new that they almost feel foreign, and they lie on a very thin threshold between exciting and intimidating, especially for users who are not so tech savvy, right? And this results in a tall entry barrier and a steep learning curve. So to speed up user adoption, it's really important to utilize familiar design patterns into your next gen tech designs. And this is common in a lot of VR interfaces. I'm not sure if you're familiar with VR or AR interfaces. A lot of it translates flat UI conventions that we're used to into the 3D space. So people who have experienced the traditional 2D web interface, for example, has a general idea of how to navigate through it, even if it's their first time in VR. The second is that you should be willing to focus on user needs. You might think, oh, isn't this obvious? But something I've noticed working in this field is that it's especially easy to get lost in the coolness of new technologies and really leave the user behind. And in my opinion, the worst way to approach these technologies goes something like, oh, AI is all the hype. I'm going to slap on an AI assistant chatbot in the corner and we'll call our product AI powered. Your decision as a designer to introduce a new piece of technology into a product should not feel like an afterthought. And instead, it should have a strong tie between resolving your users' pain points and the technology itself. So in the end, it'll result in more meaningful and intuitive products that actually solve real problems instead of just having flashy features that leave users behind. And the last mindset that we should have is to be willing to see the bigger picture. Sort of tying into my previous point about how the emerging tech industry's tendency, it has a tendency to fall into the trap of designing for technology's sake instead of the user's sake. It's important to take a step back and really look at the bigger picture. Does this solution truly serve a purpose beyond the novelty on all fronts? And to do that, a tool that I really like to use is something called a trifecta of desirability, feasibility, and viability, which originated from IDEO. So let's say you designed a new tool that leverages some type of new technology. From a desirability standpoint, ask, do people want this? Will introducing this technology improve users' lives in meaningful ways? From a feasibility standpoint, this is from the technical standpoint, ask, can we build this? Is introducing this technology achievable with current resources? What are the technical trade-offs? And lastly, from a viability standpoint, you should ask, should we build this? Does introducing this technology bring value to the business? How risky or costly is it? And where all of these three things meet is called the innovation sweet spot. And here you'll find that your solution is buildable, valuable to users, and sustainable for the business. And this sort of framework helps us stay grounded. Emerging technologies are exciting, but without that balance, we really risk building something that might be impressive, but no one wants, something desirable, but it can't be scaled. So whatever future-facing tool that you're designing for, keeping this trifecta in mind ensures that you're building tech that truly matters. And here I do want to acknowledge that there's a whole different sector of design where these technologies are used to create discourse or for experimental R&D that don't necessarily really start out to resolve a specific pain point. But here I'm specifically talking about consumer-facing products where the goal is to enhance the user's lives. Okay, moving into part two of the design principles. Now that we've covered the mindset piece, I want to talk about timing. So emerging technologies don't just evolve, they evolve fast. What feels like a breakthrough today might be standard tomorrow or forgotten the week after. So it's really crucial to consider how our design goals change along with the technology in its life cycle. And here I'll go over how your UX focus should shift depending on where the technology sits in maturity using this framework called Gartner's Hype Cycle. So let's take a look. So we'll look at the first one, the technology trigger first. This is when a new piece of technology is just emerging, might be in R&D or early proof of concept. So if you're working on a design for tech that's in this stage, your focus is centered around future casting, open-ended experimentation, exploration. At this stage, it's very likely that there are close to no design standards established. So you're just rapidly making and validating a lot of hypotheses. And the next is peak of inflated expectations, and this is where the hype kicks in. There's buzz around media about this technology, inflated promises are made, ambitious demos are held, and in this stage, the design focus should be in clarity and managing expectations, not letting things get out of hand. This is where, as I mentioned before, it gets really, really easy to feel like you're missing out on the hype and fall into designing for tech's sake and not the user's sake. And understanding the technology and assessing whether your product fits into that innovation sweet spot, as I mentioned before, would really come in handy at this stage. Then comes the trough of disillusionment. This is where things slow down a little, so it's the reality check stage. Users and stakeholders often lose a little interest here as the hype fades down and the limitations of the technology start coming up. And the focus for you as a designer in this space is to do everything you can to prove that the technology can do well. So this might involve improving transparency, refining usability, and your ultimate goal here should be to build and regain trust. And right after that is the slope of enlightenment. If you successfully prove that the technology should work, you've regained trust, and now as the technology matures, standards emerge, values become more clear, and this is where you'll actually start to see user adoption. So your focus here is to keep on improving usability, accessibility, and most importantly, designing to scale up. So the number of users is growing at this stage. You want to design experiences that are scalable and account for expansion in the future. And last but not least is the plateau of productivity. This is where you can finally say your new technology is mainstream. People are familiar with it, and it's slowly going to be accepted as the norm. And the only expectation for the tech at this stage is to work reliably. So your role in design here would be to refine and optimize flows, making sure you're designing that this piece of tech is merging seamlessly into people's lives. So through this cycle, we can see that it's not just about the right mindset to have, but also the ability to adapt to the rapidly progressing status of next-gen technologies. Okay, I know that was a lot. Now that we've covered general next-gen design principles, let's focus specifically on AI and machine learning. Because designing for AI today is very different from designing AI even just a year ago. So just a show of hands or through the chat, you can use the hand emoji if you want. How many of you have used an AI tool before? Okay, a lot of people are raising their hands. Um, okay, more coming. Yeah, I think at this stage, it's safe to say that if you haven't interacted with an AI tool, you're living under a rock, right? I've heard the word AI a million times last year. But something a little different that I want to talk about here is that in the past, we mostly talked about large language models, huge general purpose models like GPT, Claude, Gemini, that you're all probably super familiar with. But now we're really starting to see a shift. As Deloitte's Tech Trends 2025 report puts it, different horses for different courses. So instead of relying on a single foundation model for everything, leading organizations are adopting smaller, more specialized models that can run faster and be fine-tuned for very specific needs. And these specialized models are also likely to behave almost like a scaffolding for the product. And that means moving towards AI being automated quietly in the background and showing your results seamlessly in your experience without being upfront, like a traditional AI chatbot would. And knowing this is really important for design because we need to figure out a way to find the right balance of AI being unobtrusive, but transparent and ethical. And as Kelly Roskovich, executive director of Deloitte Tech Trends, put it, we no longer marvel that lights turn on. We simply expect them to work. So this will be also expected of AI moving towards the plateau in the hype cycle, as I mentioned. Another concept that we should be wary about as designers in the AI machine learning space is what role your AI is playing in your experience. So let's take a look at some examples here. The first role that an AI model could play is an analyzer. Analyzers aim to find patterns in data and essentially help users make informed decisions. So they're not completing any tasks for you or making any decisions for you. They're simply pointing things out. For this type of AI tool, you'd need to design clear visualizations and uncertainty indicators. So the example shown here is a product called Tableau Pulse by Salesforce, which analyzes business data and generates meaningful insights or anomalies. We can see here that it's simply parsing data, analyzing data, and visualizing areas of interest with the purpose to inform the user. They're not completing any tasks for them. The next role that an AI model could take on is an assistant. Assistants aim to co-create with the user and complete tasks together. So it's a step more involved than task completion compared to analyzers. And designs here are manually editable, and there are feedback loops in place, all elements that really give the user the feeling that they're the ones driving with a little help from an assistant. And a great example for this is ChatGPT's Canvas. I'm not sure if anyone's used it here, but it's a way to write with ChatGPT. So usually you would just send in things through the chat. ChatGPT would send responses back. But here, the way things are laid out is that there's one main document and you're sort of co-authoring this document together. So you're still driving the wheel and ChatGPT is sort of adding on to it. So you're working together to refine it. And the third role is called agents. This is a relatively newer concept. It's actually expected to be the next AI trend this year. And agents, unlike assistants and analyzers, they actually take actions autonomously. So they do make decisions for you. They do complete tasks for you under a list of guidelines and permissions from the user. It'll take on a task all the way to completion. And since an AI model is making the calls in this role with the user only confirming and approving its work, it's really important for us as designers to really design in a way to give users full transparency on what the AI's been up to, like status updates, override options, and logs. And it's also important to build trust with the user that the AI will complete these tasks to their liking. And an example for this is something I've actually used recently. It's cursor's agent mode. And after setting up these guardrails for the agent, let's say you wanted to fix a bug, it will think continuously, exploring different files, and going through trial and error, running commands itself if it needs to, until it reaches a solution it likes. And for me, as the user, all I need to do is just hit accept. Actually, before moving on to XR, I just want to summarize and say that it's really hard to design generically for AI in this day and age, where it's really starting to take on different forms and finding unique use cases. And it's really important for us as designers to understand which role is most suitable to resolve your users' problems and designed specifically for that type of AI and its role in the system. And as a staple, transparency, consent, feedback will be core to designing ethical AI experiences. And essentially, your design will really define how and if users trust it to take action, which is becoming more and more important, especially with the emergence of this new agent role. Okay, and now that we've covered AI and machine learning, I want to jump into designing for XR. So the part where I want to focus on for XR is actually less on design strategy, but more on the visual design process. We'll do another show of hands here. How many of you have experienced XR before? So it can be VR, AR, MR. Okay, I'm seeing some hands. Okay, a lot more than I thought. Cool. So if you've ever experienced XR, especially through a headset, you'll know that one, the most obvious part, it's a 3D experience. And two, interactions work differently from your usual touchscreen or mouse click experience. And working on XR projects, I think the biggest question that I had was, how in the world do I create and test my designs in this space as a designer? So first, let's talk about why designing for XR is so fundamentally different. In 2D interfaces, we deal with mostly flat layouts confined to screens, right? And we design for clicks, taps, and scrolls. But in XR, you're designing experiences that unfold in space. The user's head movement, hand gestures, body position, and even the environment becomes a part of the interaction. And this means we're no longer just designing interfaces, we're designing spatial relationships, right? Where does an object live in space? How far is it from the user? How big should it be? Should it stay fixed to the user's view or anchored to a physical environment? And the worst part is none of our typical UX tools were really built for this, like Figma, right? When I first started, I opened Figma, like I always do. And immediately I thought, how do I even represent depth, scale, or motion when everything is in 2D? And there was no real way to really express what it feels like to reach out and grab something or turn your head and see an object behind you. So here are a few ways that I want to introduce to you guys how I've prototyped XR experiences in the absence of a one-size-fits-all tool. So to start, I used storyboarding sketches, which are loose, low-fidelity sketches to storyboard different user flows. You can think of it like comic strips, basic line drawings showing how a user might walk into a space, reach out to a floating object, or trigger some kind of gesture-based interaction. And this approach was really helpful for thinking about gestures. What action would feel most natural to this interaction? You know, is the gesture intuitive or would it create fatigue? Should something happen automatically as a user approaches something or only an input? And these sketch storyboards really help me prototype the logic of the interaction very quickly in a quick, loose, low fidelity way before getting caught up in any visual polish. And I also did use Figma to do low fidelity mockups and animations. So once I had a clear idea of the interaction flow, I'd move into Figma to create a more detailed, high fidelity UI mockup. So even though Figma is two-dimensional, it was still super helpful for animating transitions from the user's point of view, showing how panels or objects move with gaze or hand position, and communicating the overall experience in a clean and visual way, which was actually really effective for developer handoff because it gave them a strong visual anchor and timeline to really start thinking about implementation. And animations here really help simulate movement and timing, even without the full spatial capacity. And the third is VR sketching for a field of view. Another thing that I really liked about this was that these were sort of like head diagrams showing what sits in the user's forward view, what lives in their peripheral vision, and what might be outside their natural head turn range. This was really helpful for questions like, are users having to turn their heads too far to see important information? Could this placement lead to motion sickness? Are elements placed in a way that feels comfortable and intuitive? And it forced me to design for head movement, which is something we rarely think about in 2D, but it makes a huge difference in XR. And last but not least, I also did some testing in Unity, and I worked with a headset to try to mimic what it would actually look like. I don't have the full developer capacity to make the full product, but I was able to get some 3D objects in to do some blocking. So even if it's like a basic prototype, just panels floating in space, maybe one or two gestures mapped in, it told me way more than any sketch or animation ever could. And it really helped me validate, is this element placed at a comfortable depth? Is the interface overwhelming when you see it in full scale? Does the timing of the animation feel natural? And testing in headset really emphasized how scale, speed, and spatial layering all feel completely different when you're in the virtual reality. And each tool on its own honestly wasn't perfect, but together they really let me explore XR design in a way that felt structured but still flexible. And that's kind of the point, right? Designing for XR right now is still a bit like mapping uncharted territory, and you just need the right mix of tools and the curiosity to explore it. All right. So to wrap it all up, designing for next generation technologies is an exciting space, but it also requires us to evolve as designers. The fundamentals of good design still matter: clarity, usability, empathy. But in this new frontier, we also need to stay curious, adaptable, and be deeply intentional about what we're designing and why we're designing it and when it makes sense to bring in these technologies. We talked about how technologies like AI, XR are progressing rapidly, sometimes to the point where they become invisible infrastructure. And as they move through different stages in the hype cycle, as I mentioned before, our role as designers isn't just to keep up, but make these tools usable, meaningful, and trustworthy. And whether you're designing for an AI agent that runs in the background or an XR experience or tech that's still emerging, your work really has the power to shape how people interact with these technologies for the very first time. Often you'll be building interactions for the first time, and that's not just exciting, it's really a responsibility. So what I want to say is to not follow trends and to build experiences that really matter. And thank you so much for all your time. I'm really excited to hear your thoughts and answer any questions if you have any.